privileged to be led in song by a young impresario over there, and I tell you, he did it beautifully. Well, folks, I wrote down that this may be my last chance. You know, when you reach my age, you never know when the last chance is going to come. So this may be my last chance to share with you folks in this glorious CFO family. I was reminded of that on my 75th birthday because I was playing tennis with my son and I passed out. And ever since that time, incidentally, I came too. I'm not... But ever since that time, I've realized why I might have gone on and think of all the things I've left unsaid. So as I was thinking about this, there's been sort of an increasing urgency on my part always to share with you some of the tremendous joy and privilege it has been on my part to see growing this wonderful arm of the Lord, because that's what we are. We're not the whole thing. We're only one small fraction. There are thousands of other movements following the Lord, but we have a unique place, and that has been coming to our attention more and more. And so I want to share with you somewhat of the very first camp, so that you'll get perhaps a little different perspective on it than you've had in the past, because it was given of the Lord. But before that, there was something that happened of which I myself have only recently been aware. And that is brought forth by this theme for our Jubilee year of the water of life. Now, incidentally, I want you to know that the allegorical novel, Water of Life by Glenn Clark, I lived with for years because of its inspiration, because of the spiritual insights it brought to me, because of a certain identification with it, because the individual around whom the story is woven is called Dale. And Dale is a name for a valley, and so is the name Glen, a valley. And there is a beautiful passage in this book that speaks about being a valley of the Lord, in which a valley is not always looking up over the hilltop to find out what's coming or what's going. All it is to receive and to pass on of the water of life. And so we are all Dales. And I was a Dale. And every one of us is a Dale in which we are able to receive of the water of life from the Lord and to pass it on freely. There are certain passages about this matter of passing on that are very beautiful, and one of them comes from the prophet by Gibran, in which he's talking about the orchards and forget what else, but he said the orchards do not I guess I can't quote it now, except that it says, they give that they may live, for to withhold is to perish. And so that's the way with the valleys, you see, in which they give, and through it, life is given. And if they were to withhold, what happens? Well, you get dammed up. And we used to use that at Koinonia, because if we had a difficulty, we said we must be dammed up someplace. And so let's get undammed so that the water of life can flow freely. And so this water of life, this allegorical novel, which now has been reprinted. I'm delighted and thrilled to know that, because it's been out of print for so many years. Not many people read it. I don't know how many. But those that did loved it and were nourished and fed by it. But what came to me with somewhat of a surprise was the fact that this novel was written before the camps were started. It was published in 1931, the year after the camps started. But it was written before. And Glenn Clark used to share with us, by the way, I've got to watch something. I've limited myself on this aspect to 10 minutes, and then another 10 minutes for another part. So if I get out of line, give me a signal. 10 minutes and something like that. All right. But this allegorical novel, Glenn Clark, you see, was a teacher of the great classics at Macalester College. Incidentally, if I make any errors on this statement, why, Vivian, you correct me. She's the only one that would know. Well, I don't know, maybe Verna Gale would know too. But there were one or two that were in Macalester back in those days when Glenn was doing this teaching. So he was teaching 5 of the great classics. One was the Greek Odyssey. Another was the Bhagavad Gita, the Indian classic. And another was Faust, the German classic. And another was Dante's Divine Comedy, the Italian classic. And then there was also the Hebrew classic of Job. And so here were these 5 great classics. And with Glenn Clark, everything he did, he sought for the spiritual meaning. Even if he went to a movie, he came back to tell you what the spiritual message in this movie was. Matter of fact, I wish you could have heard the classic that he gave us on when 7, who is it? Huh? I can't understand, but at any rate, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, yeah. I was identified with one of the 7 dwarfs, so I couldn't quite catch it. If you must know, I was dopey, see. But at any rate, you see, I wish you could have heard the spiritual classic that he gave on that. But so far as I know, there is no complete record. There is nothing that gives it quite the way he gave it in those days. But at any rate, this is what he did with everything. And so with these 5 great classics, he was doing the same thing. And he told us that he was down in his basement, shoveling coal into the furnace, when all of a sudden it dawned on him how all 5 of these classics fit together. And he was so astounded that he missed the door and the coal went flying all over the basement. Which isn't a bad allegory in itself, is it? Well, at any rate, you see, here was this great classic. Now, what was it really? Because there are hidden in it, and this is a thing that I think we need to know for our Jubilee year, and we need to know it also for our own lives and fulfilling the promise and the call of that. Well, it was written around the character of this young American by the name of Dale, you see. His father was a scientist in the laboratory of that college. The father's dream was the son would succeed him. And the father got this great idea where possibly there would be a scientific breakthrough. And it follows all of that, the things that go along with that, which the father got overexcited and he spilled it out to a lot of other people and nobody would listen to him and all that sort of thing. But at any rate, his idea was that he could somehow bring water out of the atmosphere to make it available any place in the world where it was needed, into the great American desert. But he wanted his son. But the son was a spiritual young fellow. And his mother, he inherited the qualities of his mother in this way. And so he was a combination. Well, the fascinating story of how he was growing up there. But the son flunked in his senior year in high school, and so his future in college was threatened by this, and so there's a lot of play around about that, all of which is very interesting. But the point is that finally the father dies, and at the last minute, as he was working feverishly in his laboratory, he reaches out his hand as he dies and grabs the arm of his son who was there with him. They'd been working all night and for many hours and actually for many days without interruption because he'd been deprived of his monies and the office was going to have to be closed. And in that, then they sought the interpretation, and the interpretation for our benefit is that the son was to be the answer to the father's dream, you see, of fulfilling this. But the father's dream was material. The son's dream was spiritual. So there was on the one side the breakthrough of bringing this water to feed the thirsty of the world, to fertilize the great American desert and so forth, and furnish the world with abundant food, which is a thrilling and an essential part of the whole thing. But the son's dream was the bringing of the water of life to the souls of men. And so it begins to weave through these various areas in relationship to these other classics of how he goes to Greece and travels the Odyssey. And what are those things? They begin to reveal the spiritual laws. Now, one of these, now out of this, I want you to see how this, I believe, is the background. This is one of the tap roots out of which the Camps Farthest Out were born, out of which the dream of the Camps Farthest Out was born. And one of those great tap roots was a world vision. In relating it to all these great classics, he was relating it to the world cultures, all of the world cultures. He was relating it to the great world religions, because every great world religion has living elements in it. Otherwise, it would not appeal to the millions of people that it has, you see. But he wove this in such a majestic way through this story that it ends up in the supremacy of the Christ Spirit, in which every knee shall bow, you see. And so here is this world vision. Now this explains many things that Glenn Clark did later on, because one of the things that he discovered is that people had read the Soul's Sincere Desire by the thousands. Everyone, you might say, loved the Soul's Sincere Desire. Then he published his next book, The Fishers of Men. And did anybody buy it? Almost no one. It went nowhere, and he couldn't understand it at first until he realized that with the Soul's Sincere Desire, it's something that helps me, myself, you see. But Fishers of Men is concerned with others, and they hadn't gotten past that point. And so here in this world outreach, Glenn Clark began to reach out. For example, he wrote to Gandhi. He wrote to Albert Schweitzer. He wrote to Toyohiko Kagawa and perhaps others, and tried to offer money whereby they could contact each other at any time if there was a world crisis calling for attention. Now, I don't know how much response he got from that. He did from Kagawa, I know. Whether he did from the others, I'm not sure. But in addition to that, here he was one of the three who called together the 12 men of prayer. Why? For outreach into the world. Later on, you see, it was his wings of prayer. So always from the beginning, there was this world consciousness, which is one of the root elements for the Camps Farthest Out. But many of us have not gotten beyond the point of concern for ourselves and our immediate there. We've got to grow larger. We've got to get beyond those boundaries until we can say with Jesus, inasmuch as you've done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And he had that. So that was his outreach, you see, which leaves no one untouched. So that was one of the things that was inherent in this thing. Now I got to better look at a note here before I get lost on some of these points. You'll find in this water of life that it touches on most of the problems of our day. How many ecologists do we have in the crowd? Surely more than one. Did you get the word ecologist? Are you concerned with the condition of our world? Do you want to maintain this solitary planet, this beautiful planet that is sent spinning around the sun in its beauty? Aren't you amazed at the beauty of our world when looked at from the viewpoint of the sun? And ecology is one of our problems today. We've been destroying. And you will find one of the most beautiful passages on ecology in this water of life that you will find any place, in which the mystic Arjuna from India speaks of the way in which we have laid waste our land, and as of how we should be loving the land and caring for it and so forth. And another one is in one of the amazing things in this was directed toward education, because when this young fellow Dale failed in his Latin because of well, I won't go into that part of it. At any rate, a retired professor, Dr. Greenwood, came to his aid and said, I can teach you Greek enough to pass your in this summer months here. And the description of how Dr. Greenwood taught this young man this language and taught him to love it in this period of time is one of the classics in education. And if you're not familiar with it, you should read it. He had him go out and shuffle his feet into the earth, you see, because he was a part of the earth, and reach up his arms like a tree, you see, because the tree embraces the sky in its branches and so forth and so on, you see. But you've got to read it to appreciate it. I urge all of you to read this book, but look for the spiritual meaning in it in every instance. And along with this went the matter of communication. Can you think of any greater problem in our day than the one of communication? And you'll find beautiful insights on the matter of communication in that, scattered all through. Another one was the fact that he brought together science and intuition. Or you might say the masculine and the feminine. And with all of our women's libs, you women libbers ought to read the part that he has to say about the relationship, because we need each other to be a whole. We've got to unite the masculine and the feminine. And we've got to do it in all of our lives and in all of our patterns and so forth. And this is inherent there in this water of life. And in addition, was that a 10-minute knock? Oh, you didn't make a knock. Oh, all right. Well, at any rate, it is. Okay. All right. I'll be through with this then, at this part in just a minute. But you see, the final thing was a breakthrough where this water was to be released on all of the earth, you see, for food and for abundance, and also the water of life for the souls of men. This was a scientific breakthrough. Now, this was published 13 years before atomic energy was released. The breakthrough in atomic energy, incidentally, it was my privilege to know Dr. Arthur Compton, who played a very large part in this matter of the atomic energy release, which occurred at my alma mater, the University of Chicago. And so I knew more than one of them. As a matter of fact, one of the great men was a classmate of mine. And so I'm tremendously interested in this. And they debated as to whether this should be released. Why? Because with such a power, they knew there was danger of its being misused. And yet it was war that brought it on. But was that the case here? No. There was nothing destructive about this breakthrough that was visioned. It couldn't be misused in that way. It could only be kept from manifestation by selfishness and greed and things of that sort. And so here was a scientific breakthrough which can come. This reminds me, we used to have at Koinonia a man by the name of Canon Bell come down and visit us. Did any of you know him? At any rate, he had been a chemist, a scientist. And as a chemist and scientist, he'd been given certain problems. He was a consultant and so forth. And he'd been given a problem that he couldn't, but he believed in prayer. And he couldn't solve this problem. He tried everything he could think of. But when he had prayed about it one time, and he had been given a formula in prayer. But the formula was, when he looked at it, it was ridiculous to him because it defied all the known chemical laws that he knew about, you see. And so he just put it aside and thought, well, that's it, so forth. When everything else failed, he finally thought, well, my goodness, I never even tried this thing that came to me through prayer. I better try it. And so he tried it, and it worked. It defied all the things that they thought they knew, you see. And out of that, he had an income that made it possible for him to give the rest of his life to the Lord. Now, I just mentioned that because it's a beautiful illustration in my mind of the way in which God can work through science, you see, and give us answers that we need and so forth for breakthrough if they are needed, provided they are safe, you see. And so I think the last spiritual principle on that was that it took a final purification before this could be realized. And as a matter of fact, the whole story ends in that way, where at the last moment, they have the answer on this thing, but something kept blocking it. And at the last moment, there was a meeting at which all the greed of the people who had supplied money and so forth came to the surface and so forth. And finally, at the last moment, it was all cleared. And they gave up all of their possessions for what Dale was able to offer them of what had been given to him and so forth. And when the last vestige of selfishness and greed was swept away, the word came over the ticker that water was flowing down the western slopes of the divide into the great American desert. So you see, this is a thrilling thing, and all of these things were exemplified later in Glenn Clark and the Camps Farthest Out. Now I want to turn back for the remaining of the second 10 minutes. Is that right? Am I still okay? What? To those early days of the camps, because this is where we are immediately concerned, where we need to understand. The first camp, Glenn Clark was really the only leader. Now it is true, he had asked Vivian to lead the rhythms, the type. There were two rhythms leaders, and Vivian led the one, the more fundamental one in my mind. But he had sent her to the island of Gerald Stanley Lee to get training in this particular thing. So actually it was Glenn's idea, you see, that he sent her to fulfill. And he had invited me to lead this, to take care of the music. And he had invited perhaps one or two others to help in some area. But he was the only true leader. He gave 2 talks a day. The one in the morning he called the spiritual orchestration. Now you see, the very term itself indicates what was meant. An orchestra isn't made up of one person. You've got a whole group. And he had a thing that he used to show me every now and then. I can't, but I wish I had it, but I don't. And I can't even give you the proper names about it. But it was describing the leader of an orchestra. I think that's why he showed it to me. Now, the only orchestra I had were the organs of the people sitting out in front, you see, in the singing, like the rest of you song leaders and so forth. But at any rate, that was the first message of the day. Now, that was to set the tone of everything else that followed. They were all expressions, manifestations of the leadership of that Christ thought which we received in the morning. And so, not only that, the prayer groups didn't start immediately. Why? Well, I imagine it was because he did not have at that time enough people to lead prayer groups in the way that they need to be led. We began rather with prayer laboratories. And I will never forget the first one of those prayer laboratories that we were called upon, but I don't have time to go into it. But this was a new term. Think of what that suggests, laboratory. It means we'll try this on the basis of something we believe. If that doesn't work, we'll try this other thing. Or maybe we'll try several things, you see. And think of the freedom that has given to us in our prayer groups, you see. All the various ways by which we can approach this. I've been privileged to be in Althea's prayer groups this week. She does a lot of strange things in that prayer group, but she's very effective, you see, and so forth. Well, Glenn Clark gave the direction to that area, you see, which was so essential because actually it was prayer that had brought these people there. Now, maybe I'd better back up a little bit on this part, because you see, the Soul's Sincere Desire was written by him out of the request of a couple of young fellows in their student group there. He hadn't planned to write a book, but he loved to write, and that was one of his gifts. And so he wrote an answer, and the answer turned into the book. And the book was published in the Atlantic Monthly. Now, was this a conventional book? Well, I should say not. He talked about golf strokes, about physical fitness exercises and so forth, in spiritual terms, see? It was very unconventional. That's one of the reasons the people loved it. But it was genuine. It worked. He had the evidence of its working and so forth, you see? And so he had thousands of, that was published, I think, in 24. Now, it wasn't until 30 that the camps were started, so there was a 6-year period there. Maybe 7 years by the time you figure the writing of it, although I'm not sure about that. But at any rate, these rhythms of years is another important thing that Glenn taught us, because everything moves in a rhythm. You put a swing up here, you see, and you swing back and forth. Well, if you try to hurry it up, you see, you can't do it. You have to pull when it's in motion, you see, with the rhythm of it. And with me, if it was a long swing, I always had trouble waiting until the time to really pull the swing, to get it to go higher. And all of our life is constituted of these rhythms. But I mustn't get off on that, but this is one of the... This is my last chance, folks. But at any rate, you see, he was sensing these rhythms in the various things that we were doing, and but that wasn't the thought that I wanted to get at. What was it anyway? In his leadership, he also, you see, was counseling people. And one of the things that was, and in the creatives, he led the writing session the first time. See, he was giving everything the direction. And what about the rest of us? Well, one by one, gradually, he began to pull in certain people that he knew were spiritually sensitive and were in alignment into what we now call a counsel ring. We met with him every morning before breakfast to see if there were any variations in the program for the day. So it wasn't fixed, and yet the elements were established, you see. And so then after that, he began to give little assignments, maybe leading meditation in the morning, or maybe preparing a stunt night, or some other special event to different ones that he could trust. But he picked them, you see. So Glenn Clark was the leader under God. Now, did we quarrel about that? Did we try to step forward and say, well, let me take that over? No, we didn't question. There was no discussion. There was no difference of opinion. We were all in it because we had come there. Now, you see, after this is where I got the Soul's Sincere Desire, when it was published, there were thousands of letters that came in from people seeking help. And he realized then that help could not be given by a simple letter to them, although many prayers and letters were answered in that way. But instead of that, here is where the dream of the Camps Farthest Out began to grow. That was the seed, the call of these people, the needs of these people. And as those seeds began to grow, then they began to take the form, you see, which eventually became the camps. And so when he invited these people to come, now I think that there were 70 there, but my wife says that there were 90 there. And you'd probably better believe her rather than me. But at any rate, there were somewhere between those two at the first camp. We didn't know each other. This camp also lasted for 3 weeks. How about that, folks? This meant that the people who came because they wanted to, came because they felt they had to. If they had to do something special to get 3 weeks free, they did it, you see, to come. And Glenn Clark used to call this the passing of the examination. The more difficulties you had in getting there, the more you had proved your right to be there, you see. And so we came with these needs. And it was out of these needs. Now then, he began to see the necessity for getting us beyond ourselves. We began to see the power of unity. The uniting of coming together on the same thing, the same theme. We begin to get a real picture of this today by the fact that here we have the laser beam, and we see that we can point the laser beam to the moon and back. We can point the laser beam to the most delicate parts of our body and touch them when nothing else can and heal them. And how does this come about? Through concentration, focusing. And if you have unity that focuses these things on one point, it has tremendous power. It can break through any barrier. And now we began to see how Glenn Clark's leadership of us in prayer, as we began to come into unity, had a power that we never dreamed of. Now, some of you may know of some of these things, but if you don't, you've got to look it up. I don't have time to tell you. But you see, when Hitler was threatening to take over one of the countries in his advance, at our Star Island camp, where we were broadcasting the World Prayer broadcast, you see, and in these broadcasts there was always love for those to whom we were sending it. No matter who it was, whether it was enemy or anyone else, it was always love. And so as that was sent out, what happened? We hit the mark. Hitler changed his plans, and it corresponded exactly to the minute and the hour when we were in this prayer, and the prayer itself came out of a stunt night. But you see, we'd already been praying. We'd already been in unity. And now the expression, as it began to come, it fulfilled the laws of the Spirit in the very process itself. And as Glenn Clark came up to me in the back of the room after, when this particular thing was going on, and said, "What's happening?" Because he'd been asleep in his room, and he was late in coming in, you see. But the point was, he'd been praying all afternoon until he fell asleep after the prayer, the broadcast on the beach in the morning. And I said, "Glenn, I've never felt such power in all my life." And he moved over to little Betty Lee, and Betty Lee said, "Glenn, I know that something is happening to Hitler this hour and this minute." And it did. And he made a new proposal, which if we had been wise enough to accept, the people over there, and to put faith in it, might have stopped the war at that point. Well, that was just one illustration. It did delay it, but later on it went on. There was another similar thing with our prayer for Japan when we were at war with Japan, and that was at the 3 camps leading up to Coronas. And so there have been some dramatic instances of the power of this united prayer. And that's why we need to keep on with this. But you see, the secret was the unity, the unitedness, which gave it the power, like the laser beam, you see. How much time?
I was just saying amen. Can you have a couple more minutes?
Oh, I'll be glad to have a couple more minutes. Yeah. But so you see, these are all things that have grown. But the point is, what do we have now to supply the leadership that Glenn Clark in that first camp gave single-handed? As I see it, there is only one answer, and that is a new depth of unity in our council rings, in which we never make a move, you might say, unless we have come into that sense of deep agreement. If that can occur, then in every camp you can have the same kind of leadership that Glenn Clark gave us in that first camp, you see. But without that, well, one of my favorite quotes, Thornton Wilder was not an intimate friend of mine, but I knew him slightly and was with him one day talking about things, and he asked me a certain question, and I forget what the question was, but the answer wasn't too good an answer. And he said, well, you know, an ounce of concentration is worth a ton of diffusion. And wherever we get diffusion in our camps, the power is gone. Now, when we are united, what are we united in? Jesus Christ only. But, folks, do you think that you know Jesus Christ? I know some things about him. I know he loves me. I know he died for me. I know that he has rescued me time and again and so forth. But do I know him? He said to his own disciples, I have many things to tell you, but you're not ready for them. You're not able to. Right at the very end, before the crucifixion, what about his disciples? They didn't know. They said, well, show us the Father. He said, why, I've been showing you the Father. Don't you know him? Don't you recognize him? You see, they didn't know. They had all sorts of questions. Well, if his own disciples didn't know, it's not strange that we don't know. But we must remember that we do not know. We know only a few little things, and thank the Lord they have, maybe it's just the hem of his robe, you see. Thank the Lord that we've got that much that has saved us in this situation, that situation, so forth and so on. But we've got miles to go. And we need to take Paul's statement at the end of the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, when we talk about love or whatever it is, you see. Now we know in part. But then we shall know as we are known, and the rest of it, you see. Paul realized that he didn't know either. He only knew in part. And so it is with us. And so one of the great characteristics of the CFO is the fact that it is a growing movement. I mean, you've got to grow. I've got to grow. Everyone here has to grow if we are to stay with the Lord. We can't keep up with him otherwise, you see. And not only that, but as we do that, then the whole movement will grow. And so this is what lies ahead of us in the next 50 years. I was thrilled with some of the things that Tim Ruthven said about our country and so forth, but that was just a faint echo of the sense of destiny for our country that Glenn Clark had, and of destiny of our world and the destiny of the CFO movement. But nevertheless, I was thankful for it because it was there. We don't know what the situations are that we've got to meet today, but unless we grow until we can meet them in the victory of Christ, we have lost our opportunity and we have lost our destiny. But if we grow and meet these in the next 50 years, only God will know what. Well, let's pray that he may say, this is my blessed family. Listen to them and move with them. Thank you, Lord. Amen.